Hey everyone. Just getting audio and things set up, making sure they all work, kind of thing. Just comment in the YouTube chat box if my audio is coming through and if the Pleasant Shire audio is balanced. Yeah, I just need to make sure people can hear me, basically. If anyone in the chat can just say that they can hear me. Cool. Nice one. Hey everyone. I always enjoy doing these. It's been a while since I've done one. They're always pleasant and cozy and fun to do. So I'll probably be here for between an hour and 2 hours, but it'll be pretty chill. It's good to have on in the background or whatever. If any of you have got any questions at all for me regarding what I do, philosophy, the podcast, my work, then please, put them in the chat. But the main, I guess not necessarily the main reason, I hadn't done a Q&A in a long time. Well, quite a while, a few months. But the main reason is, of course, let me try to get that in there. The new book, Only Ever Freedom, by myself, which I'm pretty happy with, which I will describe from the blurb. Only Ever Freedom is a covert manual for internally exiting the modern world. So this Q&A isn't necessarily to do with this book, but it's an opportunity for me to promote it a little bit. So for those of you that know me because of the Exiting Modernity book and that stuff, and my work critiquing and looking at the modern world, then a lot of people basically said to me that they'd read Exiting Modernity and it really worked for them as like a manual or a guidebook for how to live within the modern world without being like stupidly radical like many of these other sorts of books do. And, I was happy with the Exiting Modernity essays generally. But if I'd gone into writing those essays thinking that they were going to be taken in that way, then I would have probably written something completely different, which is really why I then got to work writing Only Ever Freedom, which really is meant as a guidebook. Now, it's not a guidebook in the sense it's going to be like, right, step 1, do this, and step 2, because that's silly. Everyone has their own subjective purposes and goals and things within life. So it's written from the ground up as a way to remove all the presumptions of the modern world. So that's pretty much what the book is. People are saying, please stop self-publishing books. Duh. I mean, I could stop self-publishing books, but they sell pretty well. They've always got good reviews, and I don't want to. So maybe you should just basically fuck off somewhere else. So the first question in the chat is, who are you and why are you alive? Who am I? I run this podcast. I talk about philosophy, and I talk about things like that. And I talk primarily about unknown and forgotten thinkers and philosophers that have been forgotten. Why am I alive? Because that's what God willed, basically. Please put any questions you have for me in the chat. I seem recently to have caught possibly an algorithm has pushed the podcast or my own Twitter somewhere that isn't people for some reason who are very resentful about what I do, and there's suddenly tons of people replying and messaging me fairly whatever critical things, but that's how the internet is. But I've got some questions. So one question that I was asked was, do you think most people only understand freedom as negative freedom from, due to only being able to infer about other people's, so freedom from instead of freedom from I think most people think of freedom as freedom to do, so freedom for or freedom to consume. So when we think of freedom in the modern world, in relation to a lot of the modern presumptions that I take apart in the book, generally my understanding is that the my general understanding is that freedom in the modern world is generally four things. So it's freedom to consume. We understand freedom as basically acquisition, as adding more things in, adding more people in, adding more consumption in, and things like that. We don't generally think about freedom as freedom of like a purgation. So freedom, freedom, in the words of Jack Parsons, freedom is a double-edged sword. It's liberty and responsibility, so it cuts both ways. So in the same sense, you have a freedom to do something or to buy something or to live a certain way. All these freedoms of the modern world, which we've been apparently given: freedom to be gluttons, freedom to have all this promiscuous sex, freedom to sleep around, freedom to sell our bodies on OnlyFans or all this general garbage, all this stuff, freedom to consume, basically. To the extent that we can do that, what's often occluded within the modern world is the fact that freedom comes with not only a certain responsibility, but liberty cuts both ways. And so from this, we're never explained that there's always a freedom from. So but the problem with the freedom from is that like you end up thinking that because you don't have something that you're actually unfree because you haven't acquired it. So freedom to do, freedom for, and freedom to acquire generally implant this sort of programmed idea that freedom is all to do with like filling a hole. And this is what I call the deceptive denied desire, which is basically like, for instance, many people in the modern world desire to own like a Porsche, right? And the Porsche is like, well, if you don't want a Porsche, then it's assumed like, oh, you're bitter or resentful because you can't afford it or all these other reasons. So there's always this like denial of the desire. And the problem with that is that it could just not be something at all that you want. And people need to understand that you've been given all these sort of preformed, presumed, pre-programmed horizons of what all freedom can be, and then from that you're like, okay, well, this is all my selections, so then that's where I'll find freedom. And the problem is if you're only given this like small selection, then ultimately you're going to be lost if you want something outside of it. And so really the book is all about ripping back all the presumptions, all the layers of desire, all the modern detritus. And here's the thing. I state this very clearly in the book. A farmer, a homesteader, a nomad, a vagabond, a billionaire could all equally be as free as the next person. But it's all about purging the presumptions and then building up. And if you find after you've purged everything, or as much as you can internally, that you do want to work a 9 to 5 in the pod and eat the bugs, then that would actually be freedom for you, because you've worked out that's actually what I want to do. But you need to begin to rip back those presumptions first. So that's the main point. Am I still studying Austrian economics, and why? Yeah, I am studying Austrian economics with the Mises Institute, and it's really great. I'm also noticing the difference in standards between British education and American education, with American education being far more rigorous, and that's not like a dunk on my tutors or the courses I did. Just the general British standard from the government in terms of what they think we can achieve or work or do is far, far lower. They just expect a lot less, and it's actually quite sad. Whereas the American, what the taste I'm getting from Mises is demanding in a very good way. And I'm still studying it. Why am I studying it? Because I think it seems to me, now people can correct me if I'm wrong. As I've sort of gone through the years, I've realized that the general economics that's taught, it seems to be either neoclassical, which is like light Keynes, or a lot of Marxism, and they seem to be too emotional for me, and they almost are basically ideologies. They're closer to ideologies. Like Marx is political economy, and Marx for Mises isn't economy. So for me, I always had an appeal. I mean, I like the work of someone like Hans Hermann Hoppe. And I like the word from what I'd read. I like the work of Rothbard and many other libertarian writers and people of that ilk, and I'm one for like personal hard work and liberty. So it almost appealed to me. And to be honest, the more I read just before I started the course, the more I found that it's something I just generally agreed with in principle. So that's the reasons I'm studying it. Yeah. So when are you going to do a podcast on René Guénon and the perennial philosophy? Guénon, I've emailed about 4 or 5 different people on Guénon, and it's been tough to find someone to do, like, if someone wants to send me someone to do a talk on René Guénon, then please do. I would love to. Perennial philosophy in general will be a bit more difficult. I mean, there's a seriously deep history there. I would love, like most of the times when people ask me, why haven't you done an episode on this? I've probably searched and probably tried to. Like, I know lots of people want the traditionalists from the Guénon school and they want the perennial stuff. And I do want to do talks on that. Often it's very difficult to find someone to basically who's willing to come on and talk about it. Am I familiar with Ravenna Hunt Hendricks and her system of transcendental Kabbalah? I am, and a while ago I was in talks with her with doing a talk on that, but I can't remember what happened there. But yeah, I'm familiar with it. I haven't watched. I know she puts out a lot of content, and I haven't watched. Like, I haven't kept up to date with it, so I'd have to look into it again. Mr. Nomad, where do you get your ideas? I get my ideas from a catalog, which I've prepaid for a couple of years. It comes in the mail once a month. No, to be honest, I get my ideas from the same place I think most people do, unless you're some like genius who's drawing in something from the outside or able to really connect in some way. I get my ideas from reading a lot and spending a lot of time on my own and just thinking about things and trying not to mediate my experience. I mean, most good ideas are when people are just very honest about the reality which is literally in front of their eyes. That's what most good ideas are, and that's what a lot of the big social media accounts we're seeing rise as big names are really people who are just seeing reality and being honest about what they're seeing. And I don't think there's much more to ideas in a way than that. I mean, ideas can be super complicated, but if that's the reality you're seeing and you're being honest about it, I mean, that's what the truth and that's what ideas are. How do I go about one sec? How do I go about reviewing, editing your books, like proofreading? So what I generally do, write out the book, of course, then I run it through like through Grammarly, which is actually pretty helpful. Then what I do is highlight the whole book, and then I go through it paragraph by paragraph, and when I've like proofread the paragraph, I'll unhighlight it, and then after that I'll go through again, just reading it out loud. I do my best. Like, unfortunately, I can't. I make a fair amount from the books, but not enough to really afford at this point to be paying an editor and proofreader, which ultimately is a big disservice to my work. But because when it's your own voice and your own work, you are far more likely to miss things. So I sort of apologize for that they probably aren't as edited and proofread as well as they could be. But actually, from here on out, it probably won't be. Well, it won't be self-published. That's what I can say about that. To what extent do your books include practical advice? I mean, I try to. I don't like giving practical advice because then a lot of practical advice ends up being emulation or imitation. But I like to give practices which are very expansive that you can just take with you where you are. So I often do like the sort of discursive meditation I practice, which you can really, that's really one of the best ways to begin to uproot presumptions about anything, which people think sometimes have said it's like a ridiculous practice. So I sort of take the idea of a bed, a Western bed frame with a mattress and all the doodahs that go with it, and I say, well, work backwards from the presumptions about a bed, and you can begin to uproot some things, like, why have you got a bed? And it's to do with comfort. Well, that presumes certain things about your teleology and values and principles. That comfort then, of course, is this completely accepted sort of terminal value of modernity. And people go, well, yeah, obviously. And you can begin to work back from that and unspool some things, I guess. Someone said, thank you, Rhea Morrison. Thank you for your hard work on the podcast. Discovered it during the lockdowns, and it's been a bright light for me. Yeah, I think many people discovered it during lockdowns and it got them through. So I thanks for the kind words, basically. Thanks very much, and thanks for being here. Do you discuss Saint Teresa of Avila's interior castle in the book? This was a series in your work that really spoke to me about freedom. I don't discuss Saint Teresa of Avila in the book. There's like basically one mention of God in this book. This book is trying to do something on a very material level, or like Pied Pipering people in a way, I guess. But I don't really discuss religion in this book or Christianity, other than right at the very, very, very end, because I think once you begin stripping away the presumptions of the material world, and in doing that, strip away the material world itself in certain ways, then ultimately you're going to find one thing at the end of that journey, or one. You're going to find God at the end of that journey, hopefully. Or you double down, you go back into the world like a lot of people do. But Saint Teresa of Avila is a fantastic book on freedom, because all freedom for her begins in that first choice of entering the castle, which is, the Chaldean oracles, which is know thyself. That first thing that you need to do in these 7 mansions. Before you even get in the mansions at all, you have to go through the wall on the outside, which is material. And you have to develop a relationship with the modern world, which is one of giving it away, because that's not where everything can be. So freedom for her begins from bringing yourself out of the unlimited, we've got 1,001 choices of modernity, and putting yourself into some serious, principled and value-laden limitations, and going deep. Am I going to get Bob Dobbs on soon? Really appreciate your previous work with him. This is the same person who asks this every single time. And I promise you, I will get Bob on again at some point. And I've actually got half a document of questions but I've spoken to Bob quite a few times. So I try keep things new. And that's a conversation I've got to prepare for. And it's going to be hopefully between me, Bob, and another guy called Clinton. So I am trying to get there with the questions, but me and Bob have spoken about McLuhan so much. We really have covered a lot of the basics of McLuhan. So I want to make sure that we go into different areas, and I really want to focus on the Joycean aspects, basically. So hopefully soon I'll try get him. I tell you what, I'll try do Bob as a Christmas special, because I think that would work well. That would be a good Christmas special. How does your conversion to Christianity affect your interest in Deleuze and CCRU, etc.? I mean, I could do the typical sort of trad Christian thing and say that maybe there's demons or something like that, but I think that's silly to do. I'm still interested in CCRU. I'm still interested in Deleuze, even though I've taken a big break from Deleuze, which I think people need to do, because he sort of the Deleuzean stuff that's around at the moment ends up overwhelming everything and drowning out everything. Take a break from Deleuze is my advice to people interested in the Continentals. In terms of Christianity, you just begin to see these things in a different light, basically. I mean, if you're going to take Christianity seriously as the truth, then you see things in a different light. Deleuze, of course, was an atheist, but there's so much... I still hold that I think the reason Deleuze's philosophy is so popular, I mean, there's 2 reasons. One is a silly reason, that there's a Z in his name, and Deleuze is a really cool name. But I think the main reason is that Deleuze's philosophy is very optimistic. It's all about potential. It's all about positivity. It's all about going forward. It's all about this sort of building in a way, right? There's not even such a thing as a lack in Deleuze. There's this emphasis on something else, which is very peculiar. I'm still interested in them. Basically, actually, I've got someone emailed me about wanting to do an episode on Proust and Deleuze, so I'll be reading that stuff again soon. Are you in, or have you ever considered going into personal analysis, or psychoanalysis, in other words? Do I see value in it? As far as I'm aware, psychoanalysis in the Catholic Church just obviously don't see eye to eye, because really what's happening in psychoanalysis is that the unconscious forces Freud considered Catholicism, basically, or religion in general, like the big daddy figure that everybody needed, right? But if we were just to expand that question out of whether or not I see value in it, I mean, that's a subjective thing. Whether or not people see value in therapy is, I would say that the value of something is in the results, right? So if people are going to psychoanalysis and they're finding that they're coming out of it more, not necessarily happier. I don't think to tack on to therapy in general outside of CBT, which is like just stupid. Serious therapy is I wouldn't say it has that relationship with modernity, and that's something to question, because a lot of people say, well, you can go into people are going to therapy, why aren't they so much happier? I think the teleology of therapy shouldn't be happiness. I don't think it should, or contentment. It should come from an unspooling of knots, which are the root of big problems in people's lives, and eventually, as those unspool, which is an extremely painful process, however you want to view that, from that eventually may come some happiness and contentment. But beginning from one of the major presumptions of the modern world is that everyone just assumes that hedonism, happiness, comfort, and pleasure are of course the agreed upon collective teleologies. Like, why wouldn't you go towards them? And so if there's if people find value in it, sure, but it's I would be careful not to, I like reading psychoanalysis. I like reading Freud, Lacan, and Jung, but I would be careful not to have that subsumed into the current language around therapy, which actually I'm about to write something on therapy as secular confession. Now, not sure I would consider psychoanalysis in that classical older sense in that, but some of the language I'm beginning to see around therapy, I just find so despicable that what people are throwing out, this notion of like, dude, you need to go to therapy, man, like therapy as this like idol, and people are throwing this out there where like any little problem but it's not only problems of the person, it's like disagreements. So if someone disagrees with someone and they're like, oh, that view's crazy, they're like, you need to go to therapy, man. Like basically using therapy as a means to sort of deconstruct someone so that they agree with someone else. And that's, Foucault was good on these points, right? Yeah. So that's what I'd say. I mean, I'm not huge on therapy, but a lot of modern therapy is. I mean, they've actually managed to water down CBT now. I can't remember what it's called, something else BT, but they've managed to water that down, which is pretty impressive. But pretty much most of the majority of the common forms of modern therapy just seem to be pretty useless. But it's subjective. The value is subjective. If you do it and you do it for some weeks and it works for you, then go do it. What are the limits of your faith? There's like a kid in the hallway screaming. What are the limits of your faith and your search for knowledge? You have no problem delving into occult topics. For example, some Catholics won't even do yoga. Well, I think there's a huge difference. Someone did ask me this the other day about like, where's the limit going to be now? And this is actually a discussion I've had to have with myself a lot. And my line on this is this: like, if we were to take occult stuff and even things like Nietzsche and Schopenhauer as examples, Hermeticism, occultism, Schopenhauer, Nietzsche, these things exist. As far as I'm concerned, it's far more damaging for people to just like push them under the rug and ignore them, because then you don't know what the hell's going on. These things still interest me. This is culture. This is philosophy. This is spirituality. You can't just say, well, like, I believe the Catholic Church is the truth, but to suddenly just then turn to all these other people I've spoken to and have these very beautiful cultural systems which they've been brought up in and just be like, you're wrong, right? To me, yeah, they're wrong, but I still find there's a lot of beauty in them. I spoke to John Michael Greer about Druidry just the other day. I'm not going to stop doing these things. Dialectical behavior therapy, that's the one. The only thing I'm going to stop doing is leaning is having a sort of an emphasis or a leaning towards practice. So I'll be talking about them more on the historical, philosophical, and cultural level. Like, okay, let's look at what you believe, basically. And I'll still be doing that. Will there be subjects I won't touch? Probably not. I mean, no, probably not. I mean, some Catholics won't even do yoga. But I mean, this is the line really is between the culture and the philosophy and the ideas and the practice. I wouldn't do yoga. But am I going to start telling people to not do it? No. what with a channel called Hermetics, have you overlooked Franz Bardon, or did I miss it? I haven't overlooked Franz Bardon. As many of you will know, Franz Bardon was actually a system that I know a fair amount about. I spent a lot of time with initiation into Hermetics a long time ago, and I'm fond of Franz Bardon. I think Franz Bardon was a good guy. I've yet to read his biography. I really want to. Did you miss it? No. There is a guy I know who writes commentaries on Franz Bardon. I probably would like to talk to him at some point. I've been meaning to do it. Ironically, Hermetics, I haven't really tackled Hermeticism or initiation into Hermetics all that much. Have I researched Catholic therapy? I looked into Catholic therapy. I mean, I'm not someone. I'm not someone. I don't really want to. I don't feel the need to go to therapy. To be honest with you, I mean, anyone who's spent time in prayer and confession will know that is a serious. And if you believe, if you truly have faith, and you truly have faith in grace, then prayer and confession are far, far different to therapy. And so Catholic therapy, I don't know enough about it to say, but this is something that I would still be. I'm still a sort of a firm believer of, like, know thyself, so it would be something that I'd do on a personal level, I guess. Go not to the elves for advice; they will say yes and no. There was a couple of other questions. So Greer episode coming soon, someone asked. Yeah, so there's a Greer episode coming up probably in about a month on Druidry, which was obviously a long time coming. Greer that's his primary thing. He is a druid. Keep the questions coming, by the way. Greer is a druid, so that was great. I mean, I just love talking to John. I really do. He's a great guy. I basically never have to do any edits to the episode in terms of pauses or ums and ahs. Like, he's stupidly quick, like ridiculously quick, and it's just a delight to talk to, basically. Someone else asked, am I familiar with Gene Wolfe? I'm familiar with Gene Wolfe, but I've yet to read any, and he's on the fiction list near the top. I've got a couple of fiction books I want to get through, and then that I'm gonna get to Gene Wolfe. Like, I just finished Lord of the Rings for the first time, and it took me a while, mainly because it wasn't something I wanted to rush near the end and to just slam through it. I mean, it really is just astounding how beautiful and expansive Lord of the Rings is. But not just that, I think after you've read it, any notion that it's not a religiously themed or Catholic book is just nonsense. Okay, there's a bit right before Frodo and Sam, they're at the base of Mount Doom, like this every day. They're like basically passing out, waking up and having a little bit of lambus bread and marching on. And Tolkien's talking about it as like the darkest black, right? The worst evil and darkest place ever. And then he's talking about the only way they got through this darkness is with water and wafers of lambus bread. I mean, at that point you just think, okay, this is so blindingly obvious. I mean, people say that, oh, there's some subtle hints that it's like a Christian, Christian metaphors or allegory. I always get those words mixed up a little bit, but it just is. There's no question. Someone said some of the discussion in the some of the new Steiner episode was reminiscent of aspects of Tolkien's mythology. Any thoughts on taking a look at influences, themes in his work from a more Hermetics adjacent? So there is David Engels, who I did the discussions on Oswald Spengler's Decline of the West. He's not a Tolkien scholar, but he said to me he reads Tolkien every day. There's so much Tolkien, and I'm like now firmly on this train. The Silmarillion's on its way. I'm reading just before bed. I read usually a couple of poems at the moment from The Adventures of Tom Bombadil. I mean, I think Tolkien's poetry and songs, when you go through Lord of the Rings and especially The Hobbit as well, you should stop and read and sing those songs out loud. They're so joyous and beautiful. But I would like to do more on Tolkien now because there's so much there. You ever do anything on Celtic or Gaelic Christianity? No, I've it's not an area I have delved into at all yet. But it would be fascinating. I know Greer, of course, Greer has actually written a book on, I think it was a book on mystical practice, which could be performed by Christians with a Celtic. So it's Celtic something. I can't remember exactly. Maybe that would be a good place to start for me. It's one of Greer's many books. Greer and Dobbs episode. I don't think so. I mean, it wouldn't work. I'd probably do Dobbs and Land. Maybe that would be good. But Greer and Dobbs, no. I mean, Dobbs is McLuhan. I come from a heavy quantitative computer programming background, and I'm trying to relearn how to write in human language again. Any advice? That's tough, because that seeps in quite quickly. I have when I start writing non-fiction, and when I went back through to do the proofs of Only Ever Freedom, I find when I write non-fiction, I like clam up, and I start doing, I repeat myself a lot in terms of common phrases. So I like say in relation to, or therefore, or things like that. And it's like this very clunky, systematic language. Getting out of it, I think, is a matter of reading, is just reading more, and reading writers such as maybe Cormac McCarthy or Paul Kingsnorth in The Wake. You know, people who've, especially Cormac McCarthy, people who've really dealt with prose in a way where they've like pulled on the knot of feeling they need to abide by certain laws and things like that, and allowing it to really flow. But spending a lot of time with that systematic way of writing, it's tough to get out of it. But maybe some other advice would be, why do you feel the need? You could lean into it, and it would, you know, it become your own style, you know, and that's how styles really evolve. Is that, for instance, take one example, Frank Herbert has this, I'm not huge on Dune, but it comes through that he clearly has a very immense and intense knowledge of ecology, and this comes through in his style and his language, and you know, these certain interests that people have clearly come through. Someone said, I almost always read any Tolkien out loud. It's just beautiful language that deserves to be dwelled on. Tolkien episodes. There's one person, though, I know he's getting on a bit now, Ralph Wood, and I believe he was the one who wrote Gospel According to Tolkien, which is analyzing all the Christian symbolism. I would like to do an episode with him. I think he's still doing some, so that might be someone I will email. But it'll probably be first I'll email David Engels. But I'm going to read a bit more. And I mean, David Engels said this amazing thing to me, which I think is so funny, really. He said, you know, the Lord of the Rings, as just the story of the Lord of the Rings, he said, that's just a little story in this world. And it's a really great way to think about it, because you look at Tolkien's corpus, the Lord of the Rings is like, and then I wrote a story in the world. And because the whole thing is, it's like some nerd has just tried to find an excuse to just world build all day. And, you know, Tolkien's the ultimate world builder. But he manages to do it without being, you know, strangely like detailed. It's clear he's not writing like every little thing. It's expansive enough to still allow your imagination to take hold. It's just such a beautiful world. And as you said, he is someone to be read aloud. I mean, you can hear on YouTube, if you search Tolkien, you can hear him reading the writers of the Rohirrim, the March of the Rohirrim. You can hear him reading that over the footage of Peter Jackson's films, and you know, he has such a timbre and roll of his voice, and he also sings the song for the ogres. They turned to stone. He also sings that, which, you know, hum by gum by. It's a great little song from The Hobbit. But yeah, so probably be spending more time with him. I'm just looking around to see. So I guess, you know, to keep everyone up to date, I'm trying to finish the Meditations on the Tarot. But since the card of the Devil, and people, if you keep the questions coming, since the card of the Devil, the book has just gone downhill, and I'm still holding to the theory that that the author, Valentin Tomberg, most likely, just these, we're now dealing with his notes, because it's like a paragraph, we think, yeah, he finished that, and then it just jumps, and then there's huge quotations, and it just, the thread has been a little bit lost, so I'm struggling to finish that. But luckily, we've only got 4 cards left on the book, so yeah, 2 for Patreon, then 2 for that, and then I'll finish up the St. John of the Cross, and then I mean, very, very slowly, I'm putting together these talks on Husserl's ideas. That's a book I want to tackle before I start tackling more Edith Stein. And then for patrons, once the meditations and the tarot's done, I'm going to start doing talks on just really forgotten mystical figures, and try get back to some of the earlier themes of the podcast, which is these very forgotten figures. And someone says, since the card of the devil, the book has gone downhill. And honestly, it's glaring. Even the card, the devil, the author's style becomes very, very peculiar, and you wonder if something happened. And he cuts out common bits that he had before. And yeah, it does. It just goes down. It's really strange. Someone says they want to believe that Tolkien wrote about the lost human history. I mean, it feels that way. That's the beauty of Tolkien. Like when he's talking about the third age, you just think, is this an age which is just gone and we're now here? But I also Tolkien's politics which come through, because they're not like, this is going to sound ridiculous, but they're not like political politics. His politics are rooted to the way of life. And so like it's like the politics of the Shire doesn't come through as placards and meetings and things like that, but there is clearly an agreement in relation to liberty and the way to live there. The Hobbit non-aggression principle, and Tolkien was like basically an anarcho-monarchist, as I understand it, right? He wanted not anarchism, but like freedom and liberty throughout the land in the form of that in the form that the hobbits have, but at the same time the whole land itself is controlled within minor ways by a king. That's the ideal political situation. You mentioned in the last Q&A that I wanted to start reading Finnegan's Wake at some point. What's your approach going to be? I don't know, because I've seen it. Like, I've seen it. I've seen Finnegan's Wake. I've looked at it. There's a brilliant site online. I think if you type in like Finnegan's Wake commentary, there's this site where it's the whole of Finnegan's Wake, and then like as you scroll, it's there. But on anything that's of importance, which is basically the whole book, you can hover over it and there's like an explanation. But you realize just how insanely detailed and almost holy writ like that book is with what Joyce, the knowledge Joyce had. So that might be a resource I use. Could do a reading group, but I think that would be, we'd all go mad. Someone said that, the Scouring of the Shire chapter. I mean, it's completely understandable that Jackson left that out, because, I mean, it's telling of the modern world that it was left out, because it's it's not what you want to go to the cinema and see after these other two films. The Triumph of the Ring, well, which isn't really a triumph, but the way it's perceived, the ring has finally been thrown, the evil has been cast down, Aragorn is crowned king, the hobbits, you bow to no man, right? And everyone wells up. You don't then want this peculiar thing in the Scouring of the Shire to come in and be like, okay, well, actually evil was still around, and they then have to beat it again, and then Frodo goes off. But actually, arguably, it's in terms of the themes of the book, in terms of good and evil, and of the stain of sin on the soul, and the impression of sin on the soul, and what it does, and how it murks up the water, and the purity. It's actually probably one of the most, if not the most important chapter in the book, because it's this fact that there isn't this like clear cut, we got rid of sin, like Frodo's still in agony from the dagger, from the ring wraiths, and that chapter's needed. And there's a fascinating little section actually in Return of the King, the book, where as they've gone to Rivendell and they've all settled after throwing the ring away, and they finally march or start their journey back to Hobbiton, to the Shire, and they pass Saruman, not Sauron. They pass Saruman on the road, but they just see him from behind, and now he's wearing this like dirty patchworked cloak again, and he's just this withered old man with worm tongue, and they just sort of leave him be. And I think that's really key and important. Have I ever attended the TLM, the traditional Latin Mass? I haven't yet. So where nearest me, there is, in the cathedral nearest me, there is one a month, which I'm intending to get to. Yeah. So I haven't been yet, basically. No. Have you listened to Keith Wood's reading group? I think you would like it. It's not about politics. I haven't. I've listened to a few of Keith Wood's things. They're somewhat interesting to me. But I haven't listened to the reading group. So if someone bungs a link somewhere, I'll head over. I really appreciate all the work you do. I've been interested. Someone said having a king is ideal. No, it is. It is ideal. I appreciate all the work you do. I've been introduced to so many thinkers, philosophers. Maybe I missed it during the Chiron episode, but why, how is it do you find his work hopeful? I would say with Chiron, or Emile Chiron, that because of the fact there is such honesty there, and he is not holding back about how he is as a person who was clearly created. I mean, it's fairly not obvious, but something comes through in Chiron where you can still see that he is battling with Christ and with God at all times. There's a book by Marco, I think his first name is called the Mystical Nihilism, I think it's called, of Emile Chiron. I haven't read it yet, but I thought, and the guy who wrote it is a priest, he's a Catholic priest. I really want to interview him. But I find hope in Chiron because I think even more than Nietzsche, because Nietzsche's this like grand vision where actually it's to do with we can't believe in God, and it's not actually to do with atheism, it's to do with we can no longer believe in God, and really the death of God is read in this societal or value-based, morality-based term of Christendom is dead, ethics, morality of Christendom is dead, and we now live in this sort of the clear fallen world where we can't believe. But I think Chiron is really bringing it back almost to like the level of Augustine's Confessions. It is like a negative Confessions. All of his work is like a negative Confessions where he's just struggling with that. And I find hope in the fact that he didn't commit suicide. Everything could have led him there, but there was clearly something that was enough about life. And I think it was his early relationship with God in the Orthodox Church, I believe, that probably stayed there for him. I don't want to push onto him that he was some covert believer or something like that. I'm not trying to push that, but I just find hope in him for those reasons. That in the sense of when I spoke to Paul Kingsnorth, you have this idea from an Orthodox monk about the best place to, keep your mind in hell and despair not. The best place to find Christ is in hell, right? Because that's the place where you need the light to come in, right? The light in darkness, by its inherent definition, cannot have light. And so, like, in the darkness is where the light has to come in and push the darkness away. And so in Chiron, you're thrown into the pitch black darkness of complete nihilism in the modern world. So where better to begin an understanding, in a way, on a philosophical level of what salvation is? And that's where I'd say I find hope. I would say in relation to that idea of hope, it's one of his really underappreciated works, but Tears and is it Of Tears and Saints or just Tears and Saints? Tears and Saints, I think, is one of his best, and there's clearly this real struggle for belief and faith in that book. What would be a philosopher king equivalent for oligarchy? In addition, would we be worried about how little philosophically was ever written on oligarchy? It's always about for a man or the people. I don't know enough. I know about Plato as philosopher king, but I don't know enough about the distinction of an oligarchy versus a monarchy to understand what a philosopher king would be in that respect. Sorry to say. Have you ever read Lewis Mumford or Kurt Lewin? See through the lenses of Ted Kay. Lewin created the force field analysis, and Mumford was critical of technology and had revived an interest in Melville. I've been meaning to get round to Lewis Mumford. Technics and Civilization, right? And I don't know of Kurt Lewin. Lewis Mumford is one of the figures I really want to tackle, because he, for obvious reasons. But I haven't got around to them yet, so I can't comment really. Have I read the Space Trilogy by C.S. Lewis? It's this big old space trilogy is sitting on the shelf, and I really don't like it when books are huge and you open it and the whole page is just text with no like indentations and no paragraphs. So I don't know what happened with the editing. Maybe the book is just like that. But all the other C.S. Lewis I've read is quite spaced. It flows well, and this just didn't. And I was like, oh man, that's just daunting. So I haven't started it for that reason, which is a bad reason not to start it. But on my fiction list. How do you take into account the impact of cultural distance on your ability to understand foreign philosophical ideas? In my case, being francophone makes Gravity's Rainbow harder to read. I'm always very cautious about this, and actually the more I've done the podcast, the more I see the cultural geographical and, I guess, temporally contextual biases that I have brought to things, where I assume people see things certain ways. Not luckily, I guess in a way, luckily, I'm in like the ultimate position where things generally have ended up being skewed to the perspective of what they'd now call straight white colonialist men or whatever, right? So a lot of things end up being skewed this way. So sometimes it's actually difficult for anyone to get through to like how these things would be understood, and it's very difficult to imbue yourself with a different cultural understanding. Someone said to me the other day, and this was so recently I recorded a talk on the work of Nikolai Hartmann with Predrag Chikovatsky, and it was brilliant conversation. But he said something very, very interesting to me. You know, he studied in Russia before the fall of the Soviet Union. And he said that, you know, at that time, Nikolai Hartmann was like, he'd be in sort of the top 5. He wouldn't be considered top 5 in the world, like the best philosophers ever. But in terms of familiarity, like he was there. And then he moved to the US, and people were like, who's Nikolai Hartmann? So there's a lot about where you trained, where you did your research, etc., things like that understand it. But Predrag also told me something that, you know, just to emphasize this distinction between languages, places, cultures, that in the Russian language, 80% of Russian is passive voice, whereas pretty much in English everything is active. That clearly seeps into the culture, into the understanding of a philosophical level. It's undoubtable. Too bad that Nea Ionescu's works aren't. I know it is too bad that Nea Ionescu's works aren't translated into English. And that sphere that was around Chiron and Monsieur Eliade. I mean, I really want to do more talks on them. But as you say, a lot of that hasn't been translated. But there was a book I found on Nea Ionescu by another Ionescu. I'm not sure if I probably was a relation, right? But I think that author had recently passed away, so I couldn't actually do that. I couldn't reach out to them, which was a shame. But that sphere is another sphere I'd like to tackle in time. But yeah, Moldbug or land? That question would have been more interesting if you just said Yavin or land. Moldbug, and when he was under the name of Moldbug and land were really of the same cloth politically at that point in time. It's always going to be land, though, isn't it? It's always going to be land for me. You know. But Yavin or land? Yeah, definitely land. I mean, yeah, I don't know what Yavin really up to with his writing and things at the moment, but it's still interesting to read. And the whole neo-reaction era, I think, it did what it needed to do, because perhaps the most important neo-reactionary essay by Moldbug basically said, look, it's a toolbox of ideas to be used. And I think that's what neo-reaction has really done. It's cracked open the Overton window, broken orthogonality, and just entered people into a different understanding of things. Keep the questions coming. The book, which is sort of the vague title of this Q&A, Only Ever Freedom. If you type in Only Ever Freedom on Amazon, you will find it. And eventually, because I have actually moved away from intellectual property, understanding that intellectual property can really be held, very soon I've got to, just because I overhauled my site again with WordPress because it makes everything easier, I will do it so the PDFs are freely available, like all my other books. And if you want it for free, then go get it for free. The other stuff that let's see what's up and coming. There's gonna be an episode on Albert Schweitzer. There's going to be an episode on Nietzsche and Steiner and Steiner's influence in that philosophical domain. There's going to be already recorded another episode on Jan Patočka. There is another episode on the work of Bruno Latour on Facing Gaia, and there will be an episode fairly later on about a Jean-Marie Goyal, who wrote Ethics, and he wrote on Epicurus. The paperback shows us out of stock on Amazon because it's just that popular. I'll double check that, but this happens quite a lot. To be honest, let me just double check. It doesn't say out of stock for me, but it might be different. This is .co.uk. Someone asks, have I ever had peanut butter? I have. I don't mind it. It's not incredible. I've got a couple of jars in at the moment. I'm not big on peanuts. I don't eat much. I really don't eat much. My favourite meals are generally like bread and butter and cheese, or like a stew, or my ultimately favourite meal ever is pasta aglio e olio, pasta garlic and oil. It's out of stock. Okay. Someone else, do I read any poetry? Hard mode, not Tolkien. When I was younger, I read a lot of Philip Larkin, like most people did. Trying to think. I read a lot of Shelley. I was introduced to Ozymandias, and I read a lot of Shelley. I quite liked Hamish Fulton. Who wrote The Skip? James Fulton, I think. I quite liked him. But Hamish Fulton, I mean, none of these are particularly, they're well known. But Philip Larkin, when I was like an edgy teenager, as well, around that age, like many people, Bukowski. Let me think. Let me just look around my shelves. No, I've never been. I've only just really got into it. The thing is, I really struggle with rhythm. There's two things that I've never really been able to grasp. In any way, like my brain can't do them. Geography, and anyone who's in the Discord when we played GeoGuessr will know I just cannot. I can't remember it. I can't do it. I just cannot do geography in any sense. I can read maps, so I can do it on like a local level, and like rhythm, like music, I just cannot. I can't do that. And so poetry. To know this, whatever it is, there's all these different meters and rhythms. I'm like reading it out. If I say morning office or evening office, when I say them, I'm like, da 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 da. I'm just like a monotone moron saying these things. So I really struggle. I need someone else to keep up the rhythm for me. So I struggle with poetry for that reason. Which is why I really like Tolkien, because he's not afraid to actually go back to the dare I say it, simplistic forms, which I'm like fine with. And it's very quaint and lovely and wholesome. Myth of the Machine. Okay. Robert Frost? ? All right. Robert Frost. I haven't read any Robert Frost, sorry. Any opinions on the work of John David Ebert, or plans to invite him on your podcast? So many people have been asking about John David Ebert, and they want me to talk to John David Ebert, but I just need something to talk to John David Ebert about. Maybe me and him could just have a chat. We're both sort of doing the same thing. We're both bald. Be good. I haven't really plans to invite him on. I mean, he's just doing the same sort of thing, as I understand it. I mean, he's done a lot of work on Spengler, so that might be interesting. But I haven't planned it, but it's not like I don't have a problem with him. It just hasn't been any plans that have arisen. Can you recommend... Someone said I found Bukowski to be quite pathetic as a person. Yeah, so I was reading Bukowski when I was between 15 and 17. It's when you read him, right? There's a lot of writers that I just think, yeah, that's when you read them. I didn't mind his novels, Post Office and Ham on Rye. I would still say, actually, yeah, they're all right. But as a person, to say he's pathetic, I would read Ham on Rye. He had a pretty tough go of it when he's younger, and you can see from that how someone might end up being the way he turned out, let's say. Can you recommend any fiction dealing with collapse? Well, there's a lot, but the masterwork, there's a few that just haven't really been surpassed, I would say. Lucifer's Hammer, masterwork. Alas, Babylon hasn't. Those two are the staples of apocalyptic collapse. fiction. If you want, there is this sort of genre that's rising now of collapse fiction, which is like hyper realistic. There's a guy, James Wesley, who does these books where it's like the collapse of America, and every other page is like a reference to an actual thing that you can go buy, you know, like a utility knife or a stove. And like if you want that kind of thing, those things tend to not work all that well. I would also recommend Canticle for Leibowitz. I would recommend The Road by McCarthy, even though it's not his strongest, not by a long shot, to be honest. Let me think what other post-apocalyptic fiction. It's when Greer, Stars Reach. Stars Reach is fantastic, and he's also now doing an update to Twilight's Last Gleaming, so those would be good. Where do I get the drawings for my thumbnails? I generally just search. So that's one thing. I'm probably going to stop doing the yellow thumbnails because they're probably not the best thing for the actual like look of the podcast. And sometimes I find it really garish and arrogant now. Like I look at the guests when they might have retweeted it, and then like you go on their normal page, and then there's like this yellow thing. So I want to stop. You know, the other thumbnails I've done for like the Girard talks and the theology talks, I've had much more enjoyment making them, because then you can actually you can theme the style of the thumbnail around the thing you're talking about, and it makes it much more enjoyable to make them. So I'll probably change them. But the drawings, generally I just go to Google and I search for like non-copyright. It's often a bit difficult, and they are collaged as well, so I think they get out of copyright. However, I've never had a problem with that. I'm not, you know, if someone said, can you not use that, then I would change it all, of course, right? Based nativist Northman, literally unable to navigate further than 2 miles. I'm not a Northman. I'm from the south, my fellow man. I'm from the south. I'm from the equivalent of the Hobbit. And as you know, us. What are the two? You have the Tooks and the Baggins, right? Like I'm probably 95% Took. No, well, who are the ones that just like it cozy? Baggins. Yeah. I just stay in the Shire, basically. I don't need to go more than 2 miles. I will literally unfollow you if you give up on the yellow thumbnails. 3 people have said, man, I hate democracy. Sick of it. Alright, I'll keep the yellow thumbnails. Makes my job easier anyway. Alright, keep them coming. What are we up to? We're up to about an hour. Yeah, any more questions? I'm trying to think what else is coming up. I might think about a new reading group. So the only reading groups that are really, the only ones that are going on at the moment are the 2 Gurdjieff ones, which have been going on for over a year now, both of them. But I'm looking for stuff that we could that would be an accessible and a popular reading group. Will Norfolk survive the collapse? I believe it will. Norfolk's if you look at the history of Norfolk, there's a great couple of little books recently published actually on the history of Norfolk. I am turning into one of those people that reads the history books of their own county. If you look at the if you look at the history of Norfolk, it's always been a very what would you say, frontier based. I mean, Norwich used to be the capital, but because of the land, because of the flatness, we grow a lot of crops here. Very self-sustainable, and because of the coastline, it's always been a very and because the UK is like this vertical thing where people go up and down, because it's off to the side, you only go here to come here, and you just end up staying. It's a very self-sustaining and independent place, and that's clear in the mindset of the people here as well. Has there ever been a post-apocalyptic book that ends with society regenerating or being better than before? Well, I mean, the idea of regeneration and better is the implication of like, well, what would it mean to be better? So if you're being like, is it then more high tech? I mean, regenerating over what time span? If you mean like immediately, then I'm not sure that there is. But that would be to do with like the myth of progress once again. The other thing I want to do is do some talks on, so some people will probably see me tweeting about this on Twitter, but I want to do some talks on Where the Wasteland Ends by Theodore Rozek. and Oroshek, someone said. Politics and Transcendence in Post-Industrial Society. I mean, that book is like Illich, all these figures condensed and beautifully written, and it's been seemingly forgotten. So it would be nice to do some talks on that. Yeah. Trying to think of anything else is coming up. Christmas. The anniversary, which is 4 years or 5 years, I should know. 4 years will be October, so not too far away. So middle of October, I believe, the anniversary. And yeah, and then Christmas. I always try to get some more stuff out for Christmas, and I'm looking forward to Christmas. I like Christmas. How do you prioritize your to-read list? I find myself crumbling under a lot of books. It's hard to choose what to pick next. Priorities. I mean, I always have one Hermetics book, like for an interview on the go or whatever I need for the interview. I have one of them on the go, and I have like 3 days of the week I put aside time to read that stuff. And then with like the talks, I basically put my day into like slots of 6, and I'll just do a bit of each thing every day. That's how things get done. You just do a little bit, and then by the end of a year you have a book, or you have whatever, right? And then in terms of my own personal reading, so like at the moment I've got the Adventures of Tom Bombadil, I've got The Life of Christ by Fulton Sheen, and there's another book on my bedside at the moment, which is, I can't remember. I don't think I've, but the priority for those things when I'm going to bed and do another hour reading or so for enjoyment is like, it's just how I'm feeling. Am I in the mood to try, understand and internalize the mystery of Christ, or am I in the mood to read some cozy Tolkien poetry? That's to do. I'm pretty merciless with books which aren't to do with the podcast as well. Like if it's not doing it for me after 50 pages, I don't have the time, and I don't think there's any need to pretend that. You need to get rid of that completionist attitude, because a lot of books are filler. Books after about 1980 became a lot of filler. And yeah, like and these mid-wit books, they really have a style as well, visual style. Do you intend to get into farming, buy land, grow your own food? I don't intend to get into farming. I have a light intention to get into buying land either in Scotland or Wales at some point. Not for about 2 to 5 years, because there's some things I'm doing here which are long term in this place, and it allows me to save up. And I haven't even ruled out moving abroad, because land is getting quite expensive in the UK. But it's very up and down with the land. I mean, it's really expensive in some places and then not expensive in others, right? It's to do with weird arbitrary values, which are always subjective, right? That's Austrian. So yeah, it would either be Wales or Scotland, basically. Would you consider a talk on the Grail? Corbin, Louis Boyer, Charles Williams, on the Grail. I've done 2 talks on Henri Corbin. You can look them up. Louis Boyer. Yeah, I'll consider any. I mean, I always say to people, just tell me who you want to do a talk on. I'll see if I can find someone. Someone says, do you think it's feasible for an artist to survive just off their work in the era of AI art, like Midjourney or Dolly or whatever it is? Or do you think they will rely on a genuine patronage outside of the system? I would say that where art's concerned, I mean, this would go back to like whether or not, it would actually go back to, it's a very difficult question, because it would really go back to the idea of what it is that's within a painting. What is the notion of authenticity, right? Because it's the idea of like, if someone does a one-to-one, literally perfect replica of a Michelangelo, well, we know it isn't a Michelangelo. An AI could probably eventually do that if we set it all up right with a canvas or the marble or whatever, right? But we would know it isn't. So it's in that distinction of knowing the intent of the thing that would change it. And also there's certain humors, that I don't think would come across. I think people probably would prefer to work with a human in that domain. Who knows? We'll see. But I certainly think when it comes to illustration, that's probably going to be the first industry, because illustrations cost a lot for things like The Guardian. I knew a couple of illustrators, like for big. When I was in art school, there's a lot of people who obviously did illustration, and magazines are paying 500 to 2,000, if not far more, pounds for just an illustration that goes on the page. And if you pay a subscription to an AI service and just type in like, I need a Studio Ghibli themed cartoon horse having a tea party, and like you need that, and the AI is good enough to give it to you like that, that's probably where the first market's going to begin to fall. The thing that I really see with this AI, because it's really beginning to speed up in terms of giving it some input and it can begin to understand what to output, is more that's how it's going to affect the illustration industry. I personally then see it as, well, eventually computing could get good enough where someone imagines a video game or a film in their mind, and they go, film about a magical coffee cup who goes on an adventure through the Shire and then becomes a wizard, right? And you just type that in and you say runtime 2 hours, style realistic or cartoon or something, themes, death, right, or whatever, and an AI is like, right, here's your film for the night. Same with gaming, and that's super dangerous. And I think Foster Wallace was probably really onto something with the very idea of Infinite Jest in Infinite Jest, which is this elusive videotape which, if you watch it, it's so entertaining you never want to do anything else. And the people who've then watched it end up being plugged into like drips and spoon and being bed fed or whatever it's called, because they're just now addicted to this thing. And that's where I see that going, in a way. Do I remember information from books I read and podcasts that you did from over 2 years ago? Most of the time I do, but it is a little bit scary now. I mean, it's a lot of content now. And it's a bit scary sometimes to be like, oh yeah, I had that conversation. But generally speaking, once I think about it, I can tap back into the conversation and go, oh yeah, I remember those things and stuff like that. So I am interested in these things. I enjoy, like, I would not have a guest on and read their book or read more than one book for the interview if I wasn't interested. Like, I've been asked to do things, and I've had people email me to say, can I come on or whatever, and sometimes I'm like, I just, if I don't have the interest, the conversation's not gonna be any good. I'm interested in most things, but if I wasn't interested, then so I want to read the ideas anyway. Yeah. For those who are wondering, these are on sale. I'm drinking Planet Over Profit soda. Pop soda, jagged grapefruit, pink grapefruit and blood orange. Very, very fancy. Well, I'll ask one more time if anyone's got any more questions, and if not, then I'll wrap it up. And it will have been fun. Am I going to write fiction in the future? Yeah, absolutely. I really want to get back to it. I mean, I really, really enjoyed writing the fiction from memory. I really enjoyed writing the fictional parts of Methodology of Possession. And I really, really enjoyed writing Be Not Afraid. I loved it. And the thing with fiction is you can go off for like a month. I want to start world building. I have a world that I'm slowly already building, and I want to write stories in it. So there's about 3 or 4 books I want to get out of the way, and while I'm doing them, or once they're done, then I'll probably start this fiction, or I'll be slowly doing it while I'm going through it. Speaking of art and reproductions, did you know the Tate tries to claim copyright on public domain images which are 300 years old and were clearly public domain? The Tate has always been a fairly despicable, useless institution which promotes fairly crap art, to be honest. I've always been mostly disappointed when I've gone to the Tate. When I did used to go to galleries in my art school days, I had a preference for the Saatchi, which is always good. Limoncello. It's a long time ago now, and I don't really go to galleries anymore. But yeah, fiction, I'm excited about it. Let me think. The book, obviously, I watched the setting. The influences will be like Tolkien, McCarthy, it will be sort of high fantasy, maybe. Yeah, that kind of thing. The influences are mostly Tolkien, McCarthy, Greer. It's going to be a real mixture of the things. It's sort of going to be about liberty, primitivism, technology, imbued with Christian, a Christian allegory. Really, I can't get away from that now, and I don't want to. I don't want to write much else. But the books and my work, of course, can be found Amazon when they're in stock. If you enjoy what I do, Rothko's paintings. Rothko's great. I mean, you can stand in front of Rothko all day. Write about mysticism. I am going to be. Those are things I've got planned. But they're non-fiction. But I think I could probably imbue the fiction with some form of mysticism. If you've, as always, not needed, but if you enjoy the work and all that stuff, then the Patreon is there. Thank you to everyone who does support me, of course, as usual. That's about it, really. It's been a good laugh. It's been a good fun. Thanks for all the questions. And yeah, I'm looking forward to just doing more and keeping everything running. Cheers, guys.